right. Guess what we're going to do today? Same old thing. Thanks for coming in. I'm Kevin Metcalf. This is Uncolored. And I've cooked up some cool slides. I've been cooking up this idea all week, and I think it's right. But we're going to go through it because while I love these ideas and thinking about these ideas at the highest level, and I appreciate people like Joshua Rasmussen, Dr. Rasmussen, Dr. Craig, others like that. Dr. Edward Phasers also has a very good skill at that, of making these ideas accessible to people like me who don't, don't swim in those waters of philosophy, the deep waters. I think you can make things even more practical, because that's really my goal, is to take a lot of these ideas and hopefully express them in a way that you can go, wow, this is not that complicated. Because I really don't, well, that's not true. It is that complicated. It gets super complicated. But my point is that for people just to navigate reality, going to work, watching TV, having conversations with people, and still being able to construct a worldview that accommodates information so that you can accurately map reality. I don't think you have to have a PhD or a theological degree in any of those things. Those things are wonderful, and I appreciate those people who, again, are in those particular arenas, but I don't think it's necessary just for regular folks if you want to have an accurate model of reality, because, again, I think that God gives us the ability to do it, and I think he gives us the responsibility to do it for ourselves and not, hire somebody else for that, because, there's a good chance that they're wrong, regardless of their academic achievement or whatever awards that they may have or whatever esteem they may have in any particular realm. So hopefully, and I don't know why I think I'm the guy to do it, but I think you can take these ideas and make them practical. At least that's what I'm going with. So what I want to look at today is, last time we talked about Dr. Rasmussen's book, How Reason Can Lead to God. And then here's a picture of the handsome Dr. Rasmussen right there. And he has this idea that we went over, that he's grappling with the idea of why is there anything rather than nothing at all. One of the, I think, a primary question in the area of philosophy. But just, if you're just a regular person, it's a good question to ask, is why do we have things and not other things? So he's come up with a couple of ideas that he's putting out there that he believes provides good answers to these questions. And then he gives data and information that he thinks supports these ideas that he has. And I think what he's doing is not only giving you these ideas, but he's also taking on challenges to those ideas, which I think, again, that's really, I don't say really, that's half of, at least, of the battle of coming up with a really good idea. Is not just coming up with an idea, but now you have to face all of these challenges that we talked about. And so one of the things that I talked about last time was this accordance and discordance of the ideas. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, how can I express this idea in such a way that, again, it's more practical, I think. Because, again, I don't think that this is, I take the back. While these ideas get incredibly complex, and I'm going to show you an example of that, I think that the way that you deal with these ideas is the same at any level. At least that's what I'm going with. All right, here we go. So let's look at these slides that I've cooked up, and I'm pretty proud of it. I gotta admit. I'm such an idiot. Let's go to the slides. Nothing more needs to be said. So here's my idea. I think a good worldview is an idea or a set of ideas of way of understanding reality that can accurately represent and successfully accommodate all relevant data sets. Okay, so now what's a data set? Okay, a data set's just basically the information you get. You take it in through your eyes, ears, nose, your five senses, and that's data. Things you see, things you hear, things you look at, touch, taste, and smell. That's just raw data. All right, here we go. Data sets. Data sets are a collection of data that, when accurately represented and properly arranged, reveal information about the world. And think about an example I have at the bottom is the ATCG. Those are these chemical compounds in a DNA strand. Okay, they're just basically they're data, and when they're arranged properly, it creates information. I don't know if creates information is the right way to say it, but you know what I'm talking about. Because you can have those same compounds, chemical compounds, and if they're not properly arranged, you don't get any information. The cell doesn't do anything unless these data sets are properly arranged. And that's what I mean when I say just taking in the data isn't enough. It has to be arranged properly so it's an accurate representation of what that is. And what I mean by accurate representation, for example, I wear glasses, and if I didn't have glasses on and I'm trying to read, I'm not going to get an accurate representation of whatever it is I'm trying to read. But I put the glasses on, now I can actually see what's going on. Right? Some of us need to take the glasses off so that we can see things accurately, but for me, I need them on. So that's what I mean. You not only have to take in the data, meaning you have to assume, this is assuming that your faculties, your senses, that they're all working properly, which normally they are. No, that's for the vast majority of people, I think that's the case. But it's not only about taking in the information, but you have to arrange it or look at it so that it's an accurate representation of whatever it is you're looking at out there. That's kind of what I'm talking about, or at least the idea that I'm trying to get at. So, collections of data these are data sets, collections of data that when they are accurately represented and properly arranged, reveal information about the world. Okay? Now, the information that you collect from these data sets, it leads you to draw a conclusion about that particular set of data. You get a picture in your head or an idea. It could be a set of instructions that suddenly pop into your head because you're looking at this data properly. So the conclusion is a statement or proposition that accurately accounts for this particular arrangement of data. So for example, if you're looking outside and you see a big yellow disk in the sky and it's kind of warm outside, you form this idea that it's daytime and it's a sunny day. Pretty simple, right? Now, if at this point you're going, Kev, why are you wasting our time with this stuff? Everybody knows this. You're right, first of all. And I'm hoping it's not a waste of time, because when we get to this, you'll see something very, very odd. So when we collect this data and we arrange it properly, an idea pops out. Some information about the world pops out to us. And again, it could be an idea, set of instructions, or it can just be something that when I arrange this data set properly, it illuminates another data set. For example, Dr. William Lane Craig, when he talks about, well, and other people, not just Dr. Craig, but when we talk about this idea called Molinism, and I couldn't explain to you what it is because I'm not quite sure what it is myself. But one of the comments that Dr. Craig will make is that if you understand Molinism or look at the Bible through that framework, then there are a lot of things in the Bible that before were unclear, sets of data in the Bible, that suddenly are more clear. You're able to understand them better through the lens of Molinism. That's what I mean by sometimes just putting a set of data together can just simply illuminate another set of data. Concordance happens when these data sets agree with each other. In other words, if you have one data set that you're representing accurately, and then you get another data set and you're representing that accurately, it should work together. And if it's going that way, then you have concordance. And then the idea that you get from these sets of data, this idea, whatever it is, whether it's a set of instructions or whether it's some other idea that may illuminate another idea, at least you would hope illuminate another idea. This idea should successfully and accurately represent those other two data sets. Okay? So if you get this one data set and this data set and you're looking at them properly, they should come together and you should get some new idea, new conclusion that accommodates this new set of data. Okay, again, I know this, you're going, this is so stupid. Who doesn't know this? But just hold on for a little bit. So here's an example. One data set, you're talking to your boss, you have your work packet, or you're just watching what everybody else does at work, and you form this idea, this arrangement of data says, I need to show up to work at 8 o'clock. Okay? Another set of data, you figured out from your commute to work or looking at, the Google Maps or whatever it is, it's about a 30-minute commute. Okay, maybe 28 minutes, maybe 31 minutes, but generally speaking, 30-minute commute. Okay, so from that, you form this idea, or maybe set of instructions, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to leave for work at 7:15. Okay, this idea, this conclusion, accurately represents and accounts for or accommodates both A and both B. Got to be at work at 8 o'clock. I got a 30-minute commute. I'm going to go to work at 7:15. I'm going to leave for work at 7:15. Everything should be fine, okay? If this is what's going on, you're probably coming up with a good idea. That's a good idea. Pretty simple, right? It accommodates all of the other data sets that are relevant, and it illuminates other things. Now, here's another thing, too. You notice that I leave for work at 7:15 a.m. simplifies the first set of data that I need to be work at 8 o'clock, and also that I have a commute that's about approximately 30 minutes. So it takes those two sets of data and simplifies them into another idea. I got to leave at 7:15. It's pretty simple. And when you think about it, it makes total sense. That's what I was talking about earlier when I say that good ideas, generally speaking, when I'm talking about ideas. You're collecting data from around the world, not from around the world, but from your, or maybe around the world. I don't know what you do. But you're collecting data from your immediate circumstance, reading a book, watching TV, hanging out with friends, and you're collecting all of this data. And what you're doing, and you're doing it, I believe, on a subconscious level, because I'm sure you've been doing it so long since you were a kid, that you don't even think about this process anymore, which is another reason why I'm putting this in slides, because I think this is something that we all do every day, every moment of every day. But I don't know that we do it at a conscious level, so sometimes things slip by. We're able to circumvent this without really knowing about it, or maybe we do know about it, and we do it anyway for another reason. We'll get to that in the future, but in a little bit. But I just wanted to make it clear. You're just taking data, putting it together, seeing if you got it accurate, and arranging it in such a way that you can come up with a simpler idea that encompasses all of that data. That's a good idea, probably. Okay. What happens if you don't do it? Well, if you don't do that, you'll get something like this. I start work at 8 o'clock. My commute is 30 minutes. I'm going to leave at 7:45. Okay. Probably a bad idea. Why? Because it doesn't account for both sets, data A or data set B. Now, it can account for data set A because, you've got to be to work at 8 o'clock, but it doesn't accommodate data set B because you've got a 30-minute commute. So again, if you have this idea and it doesn't work with both sets of data, it's probably a bad idea and you've got a problem, right? Again, everybody's like, nah, who cares? Because we all know this. And so the question is, what do you do when you have a discordant data set? How do you respond to that? That's what I really wanted to get to. And this, before we go any further, I want to recall you back to this book that I've mentioned, The Resurrection of Theism, the prologue, I don't know what the second word is, to Christian Apology, by Stuart Hackett. Very good book. Everybody should read. I would encourage anybody to read it, or at least read as much as you can, because there are some things in there that I can't Can't quite get my head around. But there's a couple of things that I do, and this is from the back of the book. I know on this slide it says page 39. I don't think it's from page 39. I think this is from the back of the book. But it says, there exists no reality, there's no real entity that does not yield itself to rational thought and analysis when data pertinent to its being represented are presented in experience. There's no incomprehensible realities, no realms of being that thought cannot conquer if she but encounters them. Now, I don't think that that's Hackett saying we can know everything about everything. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think what he's saying is that, again, if you can take a look at some set of data comes at you through your experience, and if you're accurately representing that data, then you're going to come to a conclusion that makes sense. And if you're coming to some conclusion that doesn't make sense, you're probably not representing that data properly. If you come to a conclusion that can't accommodate these two things, okay? Otherwise, maybe the data isn't very good and you have to re-examine the data. But if you're looking at data set A and that's solid, and you're looking at data set B and that's solid, and the idea that you come up with can't account for both of those sets of data, you probably have a bad idea. That's really all it is. And I think that's what Dr. Hackett, I'm assuming he's a doctor if he wrote such a cool book. I think that's what he's getting at, is that there is this boundary, and I think I've talked about it before. There's this boundary for reality. And things outside that boundary, it's not that they're just, hard to understand. Hackett's saying they don't exist. And the way you know something exists is that it conforms to logic and reason and reasonable thought and thoughtful consideration. You shouldn't have these things that pop up with big red X's that this is a firmly established thing, but I can't quite fit it into my ideology or how I'm looking at the world. I shouldn't say ideology, but I can't fit it in my worldview. Because if you can't fit it into the worldview, you probably should be working on that worldview and adjusting it or changing it or just throwing it away. Because there are real things out there in the world that your worldview, either you're not able to accurately represent these sets of data, or B, you can represent them accurately, but it doesn't fit in your worldview, even though this is a real thing. Well, you're probably working with a bad worldview, and you need to change that. I think that's what he's getting into. It's an out of bounds thing. Doesn't mean you don't like the people. Doesn't mean they're bad people necessarily. Of course, you can have people with good worldviews who are bad people, but I guess. I don't know. Don't listen to that. The point is this. A person's worldview doesn't necessarily tell you who that person is, whether they're good or bad people. That's not what I'm getting at. But if somebody's talking to, if you're watching the news and somebody says something that clearly is outside the bounds of logic and reason, it's not that they have a point of view that you disagree with. That's not what you're dealing with. You're dealing with something that just doesn't exist in reality. Okay? And I keep going back to this, but I heard this, and it blows me away that this is a topic of discussion in society, that men can have babies. Anybody that says that, listen, again, I'm not saying they're bad people necessarily. I don't know them. But when somebody says something like that, you can know that you're just not, there's somebody that you don't have to take seriously, at least with this particular topic. Okay? I talked about Calvinism a couple of videos ago. There are some ideas in Calvinism that don't work on any level of analysis. It doesn't work on an experiential level because nobody treats each other like we don't have free will. Nobody acts like that. Calvinist, atheist, materialist, nobody acts like we don't have free will. Everybody acts like we make decisions and those decisions affect reality. Everybody acts like that. It doesn't work logically, right? I showed you, at least explained, I showed you how determinism just doesn't work. It posit the idea of determinism and fatalism because they're, they work hand in hand. And I know people don't like that, but you argue with that. If you can convince me, I'm willing to hear it. But it posits that there's just one possible value for any event. Anything that happens, it could have only happened one particular way. That's not how anybody operates. We all operate that if I did this, we all operate as if I did this, this outcome would have occurred. And if I did this, this outcome would have occurred. Nobody acts like whatever they do was the only possible outcome. It's just, again, it doesn't work on any level. And the Bible clearly, I shouldn't say clearly because everybody's got any idea about the Bible, but when I read the Bible, and you saw the verses that I was talking about in Genesis, in Samuel, you can go throughout the Bible and through Jesus' life. Nobody behaves as if there's only one value for any event. Nobody behaves like that. Everybody behaves like if I do this, something will happen, and if I do this, something different will happen. And so this idea that everything, coalesces into one event all the time, it's just an idea that doesn't work. And so when you have somebody who tells you that the world is, a fatalistic world, or that determinism is true, you just know that you're talking to somebody who you just don't have to take seriously on that topic. They themselves don't behave like that, nor do they believe it. I'm sure they write books and do seminars and talk, probably teach classes telling that BS. They don't believe that, not even a little bit. It's a bad idea. Why? It does not accommodate all data sets that are relevant to that idea. And if your idea doesn't accommodate all data sets, it's probably a bad idea. That's what I think that Hackett is getting at. So let's go to this guy, Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel says this. He's an atheist. He's one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. If some people are to be believed, and I have no reason to not believe it. I'm not smart enough to read any of his books, so I got to go by what people say. Anyway, I want atheism to be true. This is what he's saying, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people that I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God, and naturally, I hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want to be in a universe like that. Okay? Now, I appreciate his honesty. I really do. I would listen. I don't need you to agree with me. I just need you to be honest with me. And I think that Thomas Nagel is one of the most honest people, even though I disagree with him, that you'll find in the world of philosophy. And I'll tell you what, not only is he honest about how he believes, he's honest about what the data says. Because Thomas Nagel went on to write a book about materialism. Now, Thomas Nagel being a materialist, an atheist, doesn't have access to the spiritual world or anything like that if he's going to hold to his atheism that God doesn't exist. But he puts out a book called Mind and Cosmos. Let me see if I can find the book. And that book roundly criticizes the materialist or naturalist view of reality. And I don't know if you can see it on the book. It says Mind and Cosmos in the little print up there on the left. Why the materialist and neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. So listen, he's honest about his atheism, but he's also honest about his ideas and his science. And you cannot help but love people who are, well, you're supposed to love everybody, but I'm talking about, I have an affinity for people who, while I disagree with them, they're not only honest about what they believe, they're honest about all of the data sets that relate to their ideas. And that's what Thomas Nagel is doing. As a matter of fact, he got a lot of heat for that. There are a lot of folks who, in his own camp, that were very upset about his ideas and his book specifically in Mind and Cosmos, because he's saying, it's like, listen, materialism doesn't work. He's talking about the duality of the mind and the body, which is something I subscribe to called dualism. I say subscribe like I know what I'm talking about. It just seems to me that there's more than just the brain going on. And when I read things like, there's a young scientist named Sharon Durkix, who I'd love to have on the show one day. They're scientists who study this stuff, and there's a lot of folks who will tell you that, yeah, there's something going on other than the physical world here. And I think most people, generally speaking, understand the world that way. And I'm not talking about, spirits and stuff like that. Although there's people who think that's going on, and I guess I shouldn't say that. Let me be clear. I'm not saying it isn't going on, or it is. I've never had an experience one way or the other. I've never had any of those experiences. However, there's a lot that goes on that indicates, again, data sets that indicate there's more going on than just the physical world. And I'll tell you what, there's one thing that I have no slides for this. It's just popped into my head. But there's a book. I don't know the book, but there's a book on what they call near-death experiences. And one book, there's another book that I'm reading on near-death experience that the guy says they should really be called death experiences because these people are really dead. And I'll tell you one. This is I didn't even plan this. I don't have a slide, but because I was very skeptical. I'll be honest. Because come on, really. But they've got a bunch of doctors. These are doctors who are telling you stuff. Doctors of all different faiths and different belief systems. And they're telling all these stories about stuff that happened while they're in the operating room. And one story, I got to get the book. I got to show you the book. Maybe I'll throw it up over here on the side after when I'm looking at it. Hopefully I'll remember this part. But so this girl gets in this woman, I don't know. She gets in a critical car accident, right? So they get her in there and they're operating on her and she dies on the operating table, okay? Right? Then they revive her back to life. So she was dead, they clinically dead, I don't know, medically dead, I don't know what they call it. Then they bring her back to life, okay? It's crazy. And she starts flailing around on the bed so they can't operate on her. I sound like I'm telling some weird story. I'm telling you, I got to show you the book. It's in the books. Great story. But anyway, so she's flapping on and the doctor goes, "What are you flapping around for?" She goes, I was dead. I saw my dad, the same experience they said, the lights and something. I was talking to my dad who was also dead and he was telling me how he died. And she was just upset by this. So they couldn't operate on her. And I guess one of the orderlies, one of the people in the operating room, they go to the family who's in the operating room and just find out what's going on with the dad. And so they talk to the family who's in the operating room. They go, "Yeah, Dad's fine. We just talked to him this morning. Everything's fine." I don't know what she's talking about with Dad being dead, right? So they go back into the operating. This orderly says, "We just talked to your family. Your dad's fine. Just relax. Let us, help you out and operate on you." She goes, No. He's dead. I just talked to him and he told me exactly how he died. And they tell her what happened. So they go back to the operating room. The orderly's talking to the family, says, "Hey, can you just call the dad so we can all just confirm this is going on?" Guess what? Dad died. Exactly how this woman said that she died. Now, I just read this in a book, all right? But if this is true, okay, this idea that there's no spiritual realm going on out there, that's bunk. And there's a ton of stories like this, not only in this book, but around the world. They're saying something like 1 out of every 25 people who die have one of these death experiences, which is freaky to me. And I don't know anything about it. I'm just simply saying, in this book, it talks about the same idea that I'm talking about here. There's data out there. Information, things that people are experiencing that certain worldviews just don't account for. And a materialistic worldview does not account for all of stuff. I apologize for going on that sideline. I had no idea. It just popped into my head right now. I wish I had made time for it. I probably won't get to the thing that I want to get to now. But the point I'm making is this. When you have a bad idea, there's a couple of ways you can resolve it, okay? I have this way of looking at the world. But there's all this data out there that says the way I'm looking at it, that's not how it's happening. Okay, you've got a few options, and some of them I've written down here. You can misrepresent the data, right? And this is a way of ignoring this information. Just misrepresent it. This happens with straw man arguments that you hear from people all the time that we went through and we may go through some more. But somebody has an idea and say, "Hey, this data set, your idea doesn't account for," and what the person will do who's being challenged by this data will misrepresent the data so it sounds stupid. It's called a straw man argument. It's making a caricature of the data. Okay. Another thing they can do is the ad hominem attacks. Right? I'm not going to deal with the data because you're an XYZ. You're a Nazi, right? You're a racist. You're a Pelagian, right? If I can call you a name, now I don't have to deal with the data set that you're presenting me that challenges how I'm seeing the world. The ad hominem attack. But here's another thing that they do. Just exclude it, right? How many times do you have people talking to you and they're only telling you the side that helps their position? Yeah, any news channel, right? Any politician. Oftentimes when you go to school, a lot of academics do this. They just present the information that supports their idea, and all of the data that says the way they're seeing the world isn't correct, they just don't tell you about it. Happens all the time. And guess who's best at it? All of us. Right? I'm not just talking about the big, the folks out there. We all have a tendency to do that. And it's something that you have to be aware of. If you want an accurate representation of the world, you have to realize that there's some conclusions that you may not want, and that you'll not look at things that tell you that your idea is wrong because you don't want to change it. You'd rather have the idea. We all do that. But there's a lot of other folks that do it. Happens in church all the time. All the time. I'm not just talking about Christian churches. You can pick any religion. There are things that they're going to tell you that help the ideology that they're putting out there. And then they'll tell you some things, but the things that go against it, they will never talk about. And I'm not saying all churches do that. I'm not saying that for any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying many churches that many people that you know are going to, just telling you the stuff that helps what they want you to believe. One of the reasons that I'm doing this is my goal is to I don't want to say deconstruct. That's a cool term that I heard from somebody else, but I'm starting with the premise that God is real. That's the premise that I'm starting out with. And I'm also starting with the premise that God reveals who he is through the Bible. Those are just premises that I'm starting out with. I can't prove that God is real, but that's the premise I'm starting out with. The reason I start out with that premise is because it seems so far the best idea that takes all data sets on and is able to represent them properly and accommodate all ideas. That's how it seems so far. Now, maybe I'll get down the road and that may not be the case, but so far that's the best idea. And that's why I'm holding to it. The reason why I don't think it's a religious idea, because I think that might just be the way the world is. It's not about feelings and experience, although that is part of the data set. But there might be just a flat, like I'm sitting in front of here looking at the camera, like I got a backyard right over there. It just might be the way things are. And if that's the case, my understanding of the reality of God is no more different than me sitting here looking into the camera. There's nothing else religious to it. And I'm trying to understand the world in that light. I don't want to be a part of anybody's, denomination. I want to understand the world the way it is. And I think God is essential for that. And I don't know I don't think that's necessarily a religious idea, especially if it's true. But I don't know. That's another thing I got into. I hadn't even planned to say, but whatever. So let's get to the end. How does this work out? Oh, I'm sorry. Second part. So if you want to resolve it, you don't want to ignore it. Let's say you want to resolve this thing. I'm going to have to cut that whole part out there because it just goes on too long. So you want to resolve this thing you've got. What are you going to do? Well, you've got two options, or at least these are one of the two options. You can adjust the data set or the conclusion. And when I say adjust the data set, you might not be looking at it properly. Whatever you think it is, it may be different. I was just talking to a kid today when I was at the coffee shop as I was finalizing this thing. And he was in the back table as a youth pastor. And he was talking about predestination and all this stuff. And so as I left, I butted in. I butt in. Idiot. People having a private conversation and I just butt in. But I asked him, I said, so this predestination, and I wasn't challenging him. I'm trying to figure out how he understood it. And as we talked about it, he also understood. He goes, listen, there are some things that I'm not quite understanding properly. And I said, well, is it possible you can understand it that way? He goes, it is a possibility. I can look at that. The wonderful thing about it, he wasn't dogmatic. He had his ideas, but he was also he was also open to look at the data differently. And maybe the data, the way he has it arranged, isn't the proper arrangement of that data. And so you have to go in and move it around and see if there's a better way to represent that data. So now you think, okay, now it all makes sense. And not only with this new data now I can readjust my idea, and now everything works together. It takes a lot of work. It's not fun, and you got to think a lot about it. But listen, if you really want to understand reality, I think that's what you have to engage in. But what do I know? So you can either adjust the data set, or you can adjust your conclusion about the data set. And here's another thing you can do. You can impeach that data set. And what does that mean, to impeach the data set? Usually what that means is you're going to try to show that that data set is not valid. Either it's not properly represented, or maybe the person is looking at it wrong. But what you're trying to say is that this data set that you want me to incorporate, that's not an accurate way to look at it. And that's a valid way to do it. So because you only want actual, real, solid sets of data in your worldview. So impeaching a data set, it's part of that process of resolving a conflict. So how does that look like? Well, I'm going to show you two ways. One way that I think works very well, and one way that I don't think works as well. So the first one I'm going to show you is, this is going to be Dr. Craig. He's doing a talk. It'll say it at the bottom. He does many of these talks, but he's talking about the evidence for the beginning of the universe. This is in support of the Kalam cosmological argument, related to what Dr. Rasmussen is doing here in his book, How Reason Can Lead to God. Same kind of idea. And so the idea is that the Kalam cosmological argument is anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. Pretty simple argument. Well, it's very complex, but that's the basic, thing. That's how we talk about it in the crazy people, the dumb people world. So he's presenting data that supports this idea. So take a listen if I've gotten this proper. That isn't right.
Empirically tenable models, by showing that under more and more generalized conditions, a beginning is inevitable. For example, in 1970, Hawking and Penrose formulated the singularity theorems which bear their name, which show that any universe governed by the equations of general relativity must shrink down to an initial singularity. In 2003, three prominent cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, were able to prove a theorem to the effect that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion over its history cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a beginning. And that goes for expanding multiverse scenarios as well.
So what he just did there was, he's giving you data sets. He's giving you the Hawking's Penrose data set that says the universe goes back into a particular point, the singularity. He's giving you the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin data set that says that any universe that's on average expanding could not possibly be past eternal. And this also goes for the multiverse. And so you can see how this Kalam cosmological argument, or this idea that the universe began to exist, it accommodates a whole lot of data sets. That's what he's setting up right there.
In 2012, Vilenkin showed that models which do not meet this single condition of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem nevertheless fail for other reasons to avert the beginning of the universe. He concluded, and I quote, "None of these scenarios can actually be past eternal. All the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. Now, that's a remarkable statement. It would be important if Vilenkin said the evidence for a beginning of the universe outweighs the evidence against a beginning of the universe. But he didn't say that. He said all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. I am not aware of any evidence that the universe is past eternal. There's simply nothing on that side of the scale. So that the evidence for the beginning of the universe, while not rendering this certain, I think certainly justifies Vilenkin's conclusion that the universe probably did begin to exist.
Now, there's a couple of wonderful things that happened there. First of all, what Dr. Craig did was, again, present you all of these data sets. And in summary, what he's saying is, all of these data sets in science support the idea, or in concordance with the idea, that the universe began to exist, which is the first, is it the second premise? I think it's the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument. That's all he's saying. He's just saying that all of these data sets, they fit perfectly with that idea, that the universe began to exist. So you have a simple idea. It's in concordance with all data sets that are related to it. It accurately represents those data sets, and it works. Probably a really good idea, this Kalam cosmological argument, on that basis. Okay, but there's something there that I probably won't get a whole lot of time to go into today, but it's very, very important, because this will happen when I'll get into more on this when I talk about how people represent ideas. Dogmatic people and people who are dogmatic about ideas, they're probably bad ideas. Dogma is, you can just say dogma is for dummies. Dogma is a place for somebody who's, first of all, afraid that their idea isn't very strong, or probably is aware that their idea is very strong, so they're dogmatic about it, like a barking dog that doesn't want to fight you, so he barks at you to keep you from screaming away, or barks at you to keep you from coming at him. That's what dogs will do. They don't want to fight, but they'll bark really loud so you won't come at them. That's what dogma is. It's, you must believe this the way I'm telling it, or you're a bad person, or you're stupid, or whatever it is. The only way to understand it. That's dogma. Okay. Dogma, even when it's justified, isn't necessary. You don't need to be dogmatic about 2 + 2 = 4, or anything that just seems obviously evidently true. You just put out the data, and most people will figure it out. Even when, and what Dr. Craig did there, you heard what he said. He goes, doesn't render it certain, but he says he thinks that, this is good reasons to say that the universe probably began to exist. He's very, very humble about it, even though he says all of the data supports the conclusion that the universe began to exist, and zero data supports a past eternal universe. He still doesn't need to be dogmatic about it. But you'll hear the people who are the most dogmatic, you can be sure, I shouldn't be sure, that's a clue. They probably have a terrible idea, because there's no need to be dogmatic about an idea. If it's a good one, it will speak for itself. But that's a whole different thing. So let's look at a different way to handle, or what happens when your ideology doesn't necessarily work with a particular data set. This is going to be a debate, or part of a debate, I'm not sure the whole thing, between a Dr. Leighton Flowers and Joel Webbin. I don't know if Joel Webbin's a doctor or not. But Joel Webbin's a pastor who's a flaming Calvinist. He loves Calvin, man. He's a big Calvin fan. Okay. And so one of the premises of Calvinism, qua Calvin, is that you can't believe in God, right? Even though much of the Bible says you should believe in God, they're telling you you can't do that, okay? So they say, if you're a real super Calvinist, and Joel seems to be, you got to be pre-generated. So before you can believe in God, God has to raise you up because you're dead. So he has to give you new life so that you can then believe in him and have new life. So you get it twice, I guess, if the way it works for them. So what Leighton Flowers does is he presents a verse, set of data, a data set, that Dr. Flowers believes doesn't concord with Dr. Webbin's idea. That's what's going on here. So I just wanted to set that up properly. So here's Dr. Webbin and Dr. Flowers going back and forth.
All right. Do you believe that one, we're talking about regeneration preceding faith. So do you believe one is raised to new life so as to have faith?
Yes.
Okay. But in Colossians 2:12, it says you were raised with him through your faith. So it sounds like through faith means that's the instrumental means by which we're raised with Christ. How do you explain something like that? And I'll give you a second to open it up if you need to. Colossians 2:12, and I'm quoting, you were raised with him through your faith. So it seems to me, even if you believe that faith is irresistibly or effectually given to the elect, it still is the instrumental means by which one is raised. So it must logically precede the being raised, at least in Colossians 2:12.
So you can see the issue that according to this verse, the Bible verse that Dr. Flowers read, that to be raised, you have to believe first. So it's this thing called, they talk about it called the order salutis. It talks about the order of, salvation. And again, I'm under the impression, but I'm no expert. I'm again, least credible person you're going to hear on these topics. But it's my impression that the Bible clearly says throughout the Bible, you got to believe before, God can raise you up, have faith or whatever it is, the regeneration stuff. You have to believe, there's verses where it says these things were written so that you may believe. I think it was in John, maybe 20, I don't know, somewhere towards the end of the book of John. And he's writing all the stuff that Jesus did. And he goes, Jesus did all kinds of other stuff that's not written here in the Bible, but these things were written so that you may believe, and by believing have eternal life. There's a number of Bible verses that, again, when I read it, it seems pretty clear. If you're a Calvinist, that's not your worldview. Your worldview is that you cannot believe, even though the Bible says that we wrote this stuff so that you can believe. They say you can't do that. Okay, there are a lot of data sets from the Bible and from experience, but just from the Bible alone, that make it very difficult to make the idea of Calvinism, especially with these super Calvinists like Joel Webbin seems to be, it makes it hard for it to be tenable. Why? There's so many data sets from the Bible that are in conflict with this idea, with a ton of ideas in Calvinism, but especially this one. And this is one of them from, was it Colossians or Timothy? I'm not sure which one it is. But the idea is that, faith, then you can be lifted up. What does Joel do with this? Let's see what his response is.
Having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith, in the powerful working of God, who raised him, being Christ, from the dead. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses. And your question is saying, you believe that Colossians 2:12 is saying that through faith, that faith is ultimately what gains us that raising.
It's the instrumental means by which we're raised, because it says through faith. It doesn't say you're raised unto faith or you're raised in order to have faith. It says you're raised through faith. So faith seems to be the instrumental means by which we're raised, which is one of the reasons I think maybe George Whitefield and others don't believe in pre-faith regeneration, but they're Calvinists. And they hold to a different view that says ultimately that we're something else like an effectual calling precedes our becoming believers, but that regeneration itself doesn't come until after we actually have faith in God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's just multiple other texts that would say precisely the opposite. I think there are other texts that speak of
What do you think
again.
is the best text that clearly teaches that faith that regeneration, being made alive, precedes?
I think there are multiple, but I think John 3 is a great one. John 3:3-7. Nicodemus, you must be born again to even see the kingdom of God, much less enter it. That you must be born of the flesh, but also you must be born of the Spirit, this new birth.
So you think
So they go on with the debate, and I don't want to get into it because it's a very interesting debate, and I encourage you to listen to it, and hopefully I'll remember to put these links at the bottom of the page because it's a very good debate. But just in that clip, you saw what Joel chose to do. He had the option. He had this idea, and it didn't quite work. The idea that you have to be regenerated before you're raised. And Dr. Flowers presented a verse that says, well, actually, it's your faith is the means through which you're raised. And his response is what? Well, I'm sure there are other Bible verses that say something different. So his job was, or his idea was, I'm going to impeach this verse. I'm going to impeach the Bible verse. I'm going to say that you're not supposed to understand it that way. Which, listen, that's an option. But that seems to me that's pretty clear. I don't know how you could make it more clear, or to put it differently, like Kevin Thompson says, if that's not what the Bible meant, if that's not what God intended to say, I don't know how else he could have said it. Through your faith, that's how you're raised. But if you have an ideology that you love more than what the Bible says, and I think that's what Calvinism is, then your job is, I'm keeping my idea. So I've got to fix the Bible, the data set, so that it doesn't conflict with my idea. And so far, no Calvinist has been able to do that successfully. There's too many Bible passages, too many data sets from the Bible that say Calvinism can't be the way it is. And this is just one example. And in my opinion, if you're a Bible pastor, I don't know what you call them, reverend, if it's your job to teach the Bible to folks, I don't think your job is to impeach one part of the Bible with another part of the Bible. It seems like you're supposed to make sure and look and see how it all works in what? In concordance. The whole Bible should fit together in concordance. You shouldn't have, well, this Bible verse doesn't say what I want it to say, so I got to find other Bible verses that say that I don't have to pay attention to this Bible verse. And maybe later we'll look at to see what he does about that, because to me, it's equally shameful what he does with that verse. But this is a classic example of I have this worldview, and there's a data set that doesn't fit with my particular worldview. I got a problem, but I'm not giving up my worldview. It would be like if you had to be to work at 8 o'clock and it was a 30-minute commute. You go, I'm going at 7:45. I don't care. I'm just going to try and, I don't know, if all the lights work right, or maybe if I just rush, I can get there in 15 minutes. You can do what you want to do. But you either have to change your idea of what time you have to leave for work, or you got to figure out a way to fix that data set that says it takes you a 30-minute commute to get to work. And I think Joel Webbin's going to have a problem, because I don't think that he's going to be able to fix that verse in the Bible so that he can have his Calvinism. I don't think he's going to do that. And what I think will end up happening, and I don't know, I think he's just going to ignore it. Which is what you do if you've got a bad idea. You have to ignore certain data sets so that your thing can go through. The other part I think is important to notice is the dogma. Because when you're dogmatic, that's the kind of response you have. See what dogma is this idea that the way I see the world is the only possible way to see the world. And once you do that, it's like you lock yourself into this room where no information can get in because you've shut all the windows, you've sealed all the doors, and the only things that you allowed in that room in the first place are the things that you already believe. And so new information can't come in anymore. Now you've made yourself ignorant. And I think only people who are scared do that. One of the things that I love about Dr. Rasmussen is that there's nobody more courageous than Dr. Rasmussen when he's looking at ideas. You'll listen to him. I should bring up a couple of, I'm going to get a couple of clips to show you what I'm talking about. He's not worried about what the other idea is. He's out there looking for what the truth is and trying to figure out a way to get all of these ideas represented properly first. And then how do they work in together? How do they all have concordance? He doesn't lock himself into some ideology that he heard from some dude maybe in, I don't know, theology seminary or that got from some guy named Calvin 500 years ago. And he's so locked into it because that's what that all of the other data that says, hey, you got a problem, that's not going to work out, He's locked it out. That's what dogma does. It makes you stupid. And I think that's what Joel Webbin is suffering from. Being dogmatic. It's not necessary if you have a great idea. And if you have a bad idea, it's useless. Because you just made yourself stupid. So, that's enough out of me this week. I probably went on longer than I have, and I'm not sure if I can even use this thing. I'll probably end up redoing it again. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. But thanks for tuning in to Uncolored. I don't want to get too preachy, and I apologize for those rabbit trails I went down through. Hopefully those are things that are helpful to you. But next time we'll get back into more of this idea, and I want to get into more of Dr. Rasmussen's book, but understand, we're all doing this. Those slides that I presented earlier, nobody should be going, oh, wow, this is new information I've never heard before. We all do this stuff every single day. But I think it's a subconscious thing, so we don't think about it. But when you start thinking about it, I think that that's how we're processing data. And I think when sometimes we'll get to an idea that we want to hold on to and we don't want to let go because, I don't know, some emotional, psychological thing. We just don't want to get rid of this idea. And so we'll start to block data, misrepresent data, ignore data. That challenges the way we understand the world. And I don't think that's the way to do it. I think that more people should be like Thomas Nagel. Because listen, he doesn't believe in God, but he ain't no punk. I mean, he's looking at dead in the eye. He wants to understand the correct ideas. Now, I don't know where he's at with God and everything. Maybe he's still where he is, has his feet digged in. That's fine. That's, everybody got to do what they got to do. But at least he's honest about the ideas that are out there. He's not, at least not in this regard, not hiding from reality. And I think that's something that it's very easy for us to do. All right, that's enough for me. All right, thanks for tuning in to Uncolored, and you guys get out of here. All right, see ya.